Hey, this is Glenn. Welcome back to Dug Out the Cardboard. Thanks for joining in today. Today I want to talk about my hobby story, my timeline of collecting. It's very similar to a lot of people and a lot of collectors out there. You saw from the last episode, you saw me playing in the Little League World Series as a 10-year-old. That was 1982. That was prime time for me and my building of my collection of baseball cards. Basically looking back from the late 70s when I was about seven or 8 years old through about when I was 15 or so. Those were the years that I really built up my collection and was heavily engrossed in building it up. Like most, those days weren't spent looking back and trying to pick out some vintage cards in the 50s and 60s. I was heavily focused on those current day cards of mostly the late 70s and definitely into the early 80s. The way I got cards back then was mostly through packs, buying those at the grocery store or a local convenience store. I lived within bike riding distance of some of my best friends. I can remember spending days, hours and days with them trading cards. I would strap a bag of cards onto my handlebars. It'd be full of either a binder or some boxes of cards, and would take off on about a mile bike ride to my best friend's house. Actually, one of the players that was on both teams, Lane Corum, was a family. Three sons. Lane was roughly my age. He had two younger brothers, and would spend hours and days trading cards with them. If we weren't out playing basketball or stickball or football, then we were inside trading cards between us all the time. I also had a local flea market that was next to my grandparents' house, and we would usually go there, usually on every Sunday, to go visit my grandparents. And one of the highlights of my trips there, I can always remember, again, within walking distance of their house, I could, even as a 7 or 8 year old, make the trek and walk to the flea market. And there was always a few sellers of baseball cards there, so that was always a highlight of many a weekend of going to my grandparents' house and going to the flea market and coming back with either packs of cards or some cards I could find, going through some boxes. I was also lucky enough, as I think maybe 14, 15-year-old, I was able to work at a local card shop. One of the actually, it was an umpire in one of our little leagues, opened up a card shop, and a handful of us got fortunate enough to land a quote-unquote job at the card shop. Obviously, as 14, 15-year-olds, we were getting paid in cards and packs, but probably the best job I've ever had, looking back on it now. That was a lot of fun. We would spend time getting shipments of cards in. We would break open packs and build sets, and I can still remember even the mini cards back like in the 86 time frame, opening up a case of those and just laying out sequential order building sets based on these cases that came into the store. So we were pretty fortunate there to have access to that local card shop, and had a lot of fun. As I mentioned, my collection was 1980s heavy, and my favorite players back in the day, I'm going to share some cards of them right here. So give me a second and I will turn the camera around and share some of my favorite players and favorite cards from that time frame. The earliest card that I was really a big fan of, and a big fan of the player, pretty iconic card in the hobby collecting industry. This is 1980 Rickey Henderson rookie. Again, nothing that uncommon, just a very popular card. Rickey was probably, if not my favorite player, definitely in the top 2 or 3. And I was fortunate enough to have a few of these cards along the way, so excited to share this one here. Probably my favorite player in the 80s was a guy I thought was just destined for Hall of Fame. He had a first couple of years that was just incredible. Had a great career. Got derailed a few times by a few off-the-field issues, but Dwight Gooden was definitely my favorite pitcher of that era. Myself, obviously, you saw last episode being a pitcher and a first baseman. I've got a first baseman coming up that was also one of my favorite players, but Dwight Gooden was definitely my favorite pitcher of the time. This is a 1984 Topps Traded that I treasured back when I was 15 years old, 13, 14, 15 years old. One of his teammates was also one of my favorite players, Darryl Strawberry. Obviously, being that young and having a last name like Strawberry, I was drawn to just the uniqueness of his name for sure. But he also played locally here. I grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee, and he made his professional debut here in Kingsport, Tennessee, in the Rookie League of Appalachian League locally here. So another reason that Darryl was one of my favorite players growing up. This is his 1983 Topps Traded rookie. Another player that was a big fan, I was a big fan of, Eric Davis. Very similar to Strawberry, just very exciting to watch. A lot of power, a lot of speed. Played in the Reds organization. I was a fan of the Reds at that point as well. Even before I was playing in their minor league organization, I was definitely a fan of them growing up. But Eric Davis was another one. This is his 1985 Topps rookie card. And then the first baseman that I was a big fan of, the crime dog, Fred McGriff. I can remember talked about trading with my best friends. I was actually on a run here. I was trying to get every Fred McGriff that all my best friends had. I think I've got 17 of these 1986 Donruss rookies, and I even have 2 of his 1986 Leaf versions. So this was a card that I thought was going to be the best card ever, and it's turned out to be a great card. Fred obviously got elected to the Hall of Fame fairly recently, so it's been awesome to have so many of his rookie cards. And he was a big first baseman, kind of tall like I was, and played first base. So another player I was very fond of during the mid '80s. I had 2 sets that in the 80s that I was very fortunate to get. They were probably, I don't know if they were the 2 rarest sets of the 80s, but definitely 2 sets that not many people had during that time. One was the 1984 Donruss set. Didn't have a lot of packs bought that were 84 Donruss, but did end up with the set. I think it might have been Christmas present, birthday present, something like that. But this is obviously the iconic Don Mattingly rookie card out of the 1984 Donruss set. So that was the first set that I treasured so much during the 80s. And probably the most treasured set that I've got from the 80s, the 1984 Fleer Update set. So these are the 3 probably most popular cards out of that set: Dwight Gooden, Roger Clemens, and Kirby Puckett. All of their rookie cards here. The 1984 Fleer Update set was one of those scarce sets that not a lot of people had during the time, and again was fortunate enough to have that while I was growing up, and knew that was a pretty special set. Again, my favorite player, Dwight Gooden, was in it, so that was my favorite card of the set at the time. But of course, since then, Roger Clemens ended up having an incredible career, and Kirby Puckett also had an incredible career. So all 3 of these cards, along with the rest of the set, pretty iconic and very important pieces to my collection. So appreciate you taking a few minutes there and looking at some of the most treasured cards I had from my childhood days. And as most everybody else experience in the hobby turned out, as I turned 16 or so in the high school years, I just had a lot of other interests. So I left the hobby entirely, definitely went dark. I had no cards once I got into that time frame, 16, 17 years old. Even when I went to college and was continuing to play baseball and in minor leagues as well, never returned to the hobby during those times. I finished school, finished my playing career, and ended up starting my real career, my work career, and ended up getting married and having 2 daughters. And in the blink of an eye, here we are 25 years later. I was pretty fortunate. A lot of people have the stories of, their parents or their grandparents throwing out their cards during that down period of time, but the cards kind of traveled with me everywhere I went. They were at my parents' house for a long time, but once I got out of college, I ended up with them, and they've traveled around with me ever since. A handful of different houses and different places, and probably about 10 or so of the 3,200 count boxes, with a lot of sets and boxes as well, have made the travels across many different states and houses along the way in the last 25 or 30 years. I always had them stored up in a closet somewhere. Never really went through them that much. Again, just didn't have that desire, but knew that didn't want to get rid of them. Knew that eventually there would be some use for them. Along came the COVID year, 2020, and that's when a lot of people returned to the hobby. Obviously trying to find things to do with the inability to get out of the house too much. So I think that was when the return to the hobby boom happened. But even I missed that. I did not ever get the inkling to return to the hobby during COVID. So what made me return? It was a combination of things. Again, as I mentioned, January of 2025, this past year, was when I got back into the hobby. I'll list a few things off of what I think pushed me back into it. One, I was starting to think about getting into my 50s now, trying to think about what retirement might look like in coming years. And one of the things that I kept reading and seeing and hearing from people was you got to retire to something, not from something. So having a hobby and having a list of things that you want to do when you retire is definitely top of the list. And obviously I had a hobby that was already built in from my childhood days that I just needed to brush off and get back into. So that was one thing that got me thinking about an opportunity to dive back into the hobby. The second thing was kind of one of the unique things about playing in the minor leagues is I still to this day get through the mail TTM requests for people sending me my cards, my minor league cards, and asking for autographs. So that's kind of, been, it's not constant. Obviously, I wasn't a major league player or a big minor league star. So, it's not something that I get every week, but I would say once every 2 or 3 months, I will get something in the mail that will have a card or multiple of my cards, and somebody searching for some minor league autographs. And so that had always kind of been in the back of my mind of, an opportunity for me to get back into the hobby. And that kept baseball cards at the forefront of my mind as those TTM requests came in. So I think that was another piece that kept that door open to get back into the hobby. The next thing that probably got me back in was just a major clean out of our office. I've got a great upstairs office here in this house, and the cards were in one of the back closets in this room, and just really wanting to kind of organize and get a little bit more of a great space for this office up here, and just triggered something in me to say, hey, here's my cards. Why don't I spend some time going through those, talking about needing a hobby and having some stress relief and things like that. So in that effort of cleaning out the office and just pulling those cards back out of the boxes and gradually just picking a handful and flipping through them every so often, I think that also stoked the fire and got that hobby desire burning in me again. I won't say the funniest thing, but kind of the most unique thing that got me back into the hobby was I had all these things pointing that direction, and then I had a little bit of cash flow influx, and not a big one. I laugh at it a little bit, but like a lot of people, I dabble in like fantasy sports, fantasy football mainly, and do all the March Madness pools and the college bowl pools and things like that. And just everything fell my way last year. My league mates will vouch for me here that it was just one of those years where everything we played ended up with me either winning first or second place. And we played for a little bit of money, not a lot, but mostly bragging rights. But I won our regular season fantasy football championship. I won our playoffs. I won the NFL playoff contest. I won the college bowl pool. And even the Super Bowl squares, which I think people are familiar with. I got lucky and won that one. That's obviously a game of pure luck. So it was amazing that I had, it wasn't a whole lot of money, but it was extra money that I wasn't counting on. That I was said, hey, here's an opportunity to spend a little bit of that on something that's fun. And baseball cards were coming back into my mind by cleaning out the closet and getting some of these autograph requests through mail and thinking about needing a hobby to get back into. So again, all those things kind of lined up. And I think just a combination of all four of those things pushed me back into the hobby. And when I got back into the hobby, I dove back in, and I didn't dive into the shallow end. I dove back into the deep end. I was like a kid in the candy store. Obviously, I was learning a lot about what had changed in the hobby since the mid 80s, late 80s. And the first thing I had to do was work on the supplies, right? I had no penny sleeves. I didn't have any top loaders. Those were the two things that I focused a lot of effort on, was making sure before I started this big effort of organizing and sorting cards that I needed to make sure I had the right supplies on hand. So dove way into the deep end and made sure I had enough supplies and just went through a huge sorting effort of my cards. Here are a couple pictures of my office. As you can see, some of the work in progress that I had done. This was probably January, February time frame where I had all the cards pulled out. I had to start organizing all the cards by year first, and then just kind of started from my earliest year and worked my way all the way up to the latest year and sorted every card by every set by numeric order, made sure I pulled out the Hall of Famers. And again, this was late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s Hall of Famers. So none of the vintage yet. That's all going to come later. But just really got me back into some projects and was really all over the place. Hall of Famers were one thing that I wanted to do. Wanted to make sure I had all the cards of Hall of Famers from the 70s and 80s all the way through. My last cards were in the late 80s, early 90s. I had a few there, but not many. So wanted to have some player runs to say I could have all of Dwight Gooden's cards, all of Jose Canseco's cards, all of Kirby Puckett's cards, all just making player runs. So that was one of my first projects. I also wanted to complete some sets. I had some sets that once I organized and sorted everything, found out that I wasn't too far off from completing other sets. So definitely went down that path as well early on. I didn't care what sport either. Most of my collection is baseball, but as I got back into it, I didn't limit myself to that. I was looking at football cards, basketball cards, and baseball, those three mainly. Even did branch out and get a hockey card. I'll show you that one later at some point. Nothing very extravagant, but just wanted to say I had a card of Wayne Gretzky, so I got one of those when I got back into the hobby. So I was just all over the place. Didn't have much focus at all, but was just happy and had a lot of stress being relieved. And my family will tell you I spent hours and hours on nights and weekends sorting and organizing cards. And as you can tell on that picture of the cards on the table, a lot of people were worried that the dog would come running up the stairs into the office and knock it over, but fortunately didn't ever have that happen. So that was a good thing that never had any major accidents with cards spilling everywhere. There was one podcast I started listening to about this time as well, again, with all my collection being in the 80s mostly. I found a podcast called Wax Ecstatic. The gentleman's name is Matt Salmon that did this podcast. And hadn't even gotten into the YouTube videos yet. This was all just podcast, and found it on Amazon Music. And started listening. He did a unique thing where he picked every one of his podcasts was just a set. He started in 1981 and did a podcast for every set. So Topps, Donruss, Fleer. And what he would do is he would talk about an hour. In the first 30 minutes, he would talk about a random player card he pulled out of that set of his collection. and he would talk for 20 or 30 minutes about that player and his career and unique things about him. And then the last part of the podcast, he would talk about the design of the set and what he liked and what he didn't like and things like that. So that was I thought that was very unique, and I listened to every one of those podcasts a lot while I was doing this sorting and organizing, for sure. A lot on my commutes to work. I've got about a 30-minute drive to work in the mornings, 30-minute drive home in the afternoon. So I spent a lot of time listening to that podcast. So that really, again, probably was another reason, maybe the fifth reason, a little bit later, but it definitely stoked the fire even more and got me really excited about getting back into the hobby. So that's my return to the hobby story. I'll keep building off of these stories and get more into some of the projects that I finally tried to focus on and not be as scattershot approach like I was when I first got back into it. So I've become a lot more focused now. So I'll talk about that in the future. I'll talk about how I organize my cards, how I protect my cards, how I've changed the office up here into what will eventually be a good card room. I've got some displays that I'm working on that I'll take you on that journey along with me as I continue to build out some of the displays here. I'll talk about where I went to buy the cards when I got back into the hobby, some of the things I learned, some of the things that have been good, some of the lessons learned that maybe weren't so great. And I'm definitely going to spend some time in a future episode talking about other podcasts and YouTube videos and YouTube content creators that were definitely influential in continuing to get my excitement going over returning to the hobby. I'm excited to continue this journey. I hope you'll continue to come along with me, and I appreciate you tuning in today, and we'll see you in the next one.